Maybe part of me thought that it would make him regret what he was doing. How could he leave a wife who made such good sandwiches? There's just something about rich white women writing about their dysfunctional marriages that has me clutching my pearls every single time. I made a video last year doing a deep dive into the book More, which is a memoir about the author's open marriage. And we had a lot of things to say about that last year. And now this year, I want to do a deep dive into Strangers, which is a memoir about the author's divorce. Now, you might be thinking, divorce? What's so special about that? 50% of marriages in the US end in divorce anyway. And yeah, maybe at the end of the day, this is just rich white lady problems where, she's taking a common situation that's happening and turning it into a book, as many people with her background have the opportunities to do so. But I personally found it very engrossing. And even though divorces are so common, I think there is something to say about the very similar dynamics that we've seen in so many relationships. And personally, I just love it when memoirs air out dirty laundry. Like, that's what we're here for. So to give an overview of the book, this is a memoir that was published this year by Belle. I saw it pretty much everywhere in bookstores. Like, they had their own tables dedicated to it. The book details her separation and divorce during the COVID-19 pandemic, which adds another layer to the stress and the turmoil that happened. And this was a very sudden end to her marriage. They were married for 20 years. She did not see it coming for him to have an affair and suddenly leave her and just be like totally cold and shut down. And a lot of the book goes into the financial drama of it too. I'm talking prenup, people getting sued, finding out the guy owes millions of dollars that she had no access to. And we'll get into all of that. So this book became so popular that there was a bidding war, and now Netflix purchased the rights to produce an adaptation of the book. It's going to be starring and produced by Gwyneth Paltrow, which honestly I think is pretty fitting for the general demographic of this kind of book. But of course, with almost every book that is popular, there's always some kind of backlash. And so there are readers who are very skeptical about Belle Burden and her book because she didn't disclose how much family wealth she has. There's even a New Yorker article that goes into detail about all her financial assets and the court documents, which provides more context about her livelihood that the book did not go into detail about. I have my own thoughts about this controversy, but we can save that for the end of the video. What I'll say for now is that I thought it was pretty clear throughout reading the book that she is filthy rich. Like, it's clear because of all the mentions she makes about her houses and trust funds and famous family members, and the fact that her wedding dress was designed by Calvin Klein because her mom is friends with him, and her explicitly stating in the text that she is more privileged than 99% of people in the world. Like, I feel like her wealth was never something that I felt like was being hidden from me while reading the book. Personally, it does not diminish the severity of her husband's actions. Like, regardless of how much money she makes, her husband still did what he did, So I'm going to use this video to do a deep dive into the book, and then I'm going to end it with the discourse about the author's background and whether that changes things about the book, and we can discuss further in the comments. Although I suspect most of the comments will be about the husband's actions. Really, that's what I'm more gagged about than like the financial aspect. He has said and done a lot of things that made me gasp out loud at the audacity. You really gotta be careful out there, okay? You should never rush into a marriage, and you should always have a prenup. Or honestly, you can just avoid all that trouble altogether and just stick to the tried and true methods, your hands and your toys, especially if the toys are from Lelo, which is a sponsor of today's video. I can understand how people still prefer like an actual human over a toy because pleasure feels better when the rhythm and movement feel natural. And a lot of toys can be very repetitive or overly aggressive or just like jackhammer the whole time. And so that's why Lelo is my favorite brand. So the product that they sent me that I cannot show on screen, but you can do the digging yourself. Literally, I'll have it in my description. It is called the Ina Thrust. And what's special about this is that instead of repetitive thrusting patterns, they use a dynamic thrust technology. Yes, this is a real thing because they have trademarked it, but basically it's designed to create movement that feels more organic and lifelike. It also combines internal stimulation and a vibrating external arm just so that you can have the best of both worlds. It's 100% waterproof. It has body-safe silicone. It's got 16 intensity levels that you can fully customize to your experience. You can use the code Cindy20 at the link in my description to get 20% off or as a stackable discount on your purchase. All right, now let's get into the book called Strangers. And let's first set up the scene with how the book starts, which honestly just gets into it right away, which I appreciate. It gives a background story later. Setup of the scene is the COVID-19 pandemic is happening. They are shuttered down in New York City. This family decides to quarantine in Martha's Vineyard because they own property there, which again should already be an indicator that they are rich. They're living with two of their daughters who are 15 and 12 years old at the time. They do have a third kid, but he is living with his friends at the moment, and so he's not really involved in this scenario. So it's just the two daughters and Belle Burden and her husband. One day, she receives a voicemail from a man that she's never talked to before, and he says in the voicemail, "I'm trying to reach Belle. I'm sorry to tell you this, but your husband is having an affair with my wife." Immediately, Belle is like, this can't be true. Like, this must be a mistake. James will explain this. James is the pseudonym that we're gonna give to the husband. Obviously, she can't say his real name. So she goes to confront him, and he says, "I promise you, this meant nothing. It's over. I love you and only you. I'm sorry. I'm so embarrassed." So she says, "How long has this been going on?" And he says, "Only a few weeks." So then she asks him more questions to find out a couple of things. One is the other woman was a banker that he met through work. That woman has two kids who are 2 and 3 years old, which does make you wonder, how does a woman with a big job and two toddlers have the time and energy for an affair? But whatever, I guess women really can have it all. Anyway, so Belle texts the guy who left the voicemail, "How long has this been going on?" The guy responds, "I think a month, but I can't text because my wife has tried to kill herself. She's in an ambulance." Keep in mind, we're not even 10 pages into the book yet, and this has already happened. So Belle goes looking for James around the house, and then she finds him and he's on the phone. "I knew somehow that he was talking to her. I asked, 'Do you know?' He put his hand over his phone and said, 'Yes, I'm trying to hear what she is saying.' I waited as he walked away from me into the guest room to finish the call. His posture, the hunch of his back, his free hand cupped over his mouth, looked intimate, caretaking. When he came back, putting the phone into his pocket, he said, 'She took a few sleeping pills. She's fine.' He looked relieved. My sympathy, my worry, shifted to astonishment. She had taken the pills the moment I, James's wife of 2 decades, had learned about her. Wasn't I the one who was supposed to fall apart? Wasn't he supposed to be worried about me? She had captured my husband's attention, his care, when I needed it the most." Yeah, I mean, obviously, with this happening, I would argue that he probably wasn't prioritizing you anyway in the first place. But clearly, the other woman is unwell. But I'm like, girl, you couldn't give it a second after you got caught for everyone to process it a little bit. Belle does not remember much about what happens over the next few hours other than her processing things. And she doesn't really know what she's gonna do because, again, they are under lockdown. So they're stuck together in the same house on an island. And she can't imagine forgiving him for this, but she also can't imagine a life without him. Because, again, they've been together for 20 years. And this affair came out of nowhere for her. 6 a.m. the next day, James walks into their bedroom after he had been sleeping in the son's room. He says, "I've decided I want a divorce. I'm leaving." As he spoke, I could not absorb what was happening, what he was saying. I thought the end or the survival of our marriage would be my choice. He said, "You'll be fine. You're still young." I was 50. I asked, "Are you going to see her?" He said, "Yes, I would like to make sure she is okay." I told him that her name did not appear on her firm's website. I had done a Google search and thought, maybe illogically, the whole thing could be a scam. He scrolled through his phone and showed me an announcement of her recent promotion. She had an impressive resume, including a degree from an Ivy League business school. He looked proud, impressed, and then he walked out the door. Mind you, he did not even say goodbye to the kids. He literally was just like, "Peace out." So later, when the daughters wake up, Belle tells them, "Daddy has to go back to New York for work." And so one of them is like, "Why didn't he say goodbye?" Belle's like, "Oh, he was in a rush to make the first ferry." And then she calls James repeatedly over the next 5 hours while he was on the road, but he doesn't answer. He only calls back when he reaches New York. He says, "I thought I was happy, but I'm not. I thought I wanted our life, but I don't. I feel like a switch has flipped. I'm done. You can have the house and the apartment. You can have custody of the kids. I don't want it. I don't want any of it." I'm like, oh, so she gets custody. How generous of you for just giving all the kids for her to deal with. Fuck them kids, I guess. I think the casual way of which he said it was so baffling to me because it made me imagine that one scene in Toy Story when the kid just like drops a toy and he's like, "I don't want to play with you anymore. You wanted kids, you decide to have kids, and now you're like, I don't want it anymore, so I'm gonna bounce out. So over the next few days, she continues to try to hide the truth from the girls, and her physical and mental state worsens along with the pandemic. She's crying, she's not washing her hair, her appetite is gone. She calls James every few hours in, private rooms like closets and bathrooms and the garage, even like the woods, anywhere where the kids can't hear her, because she's begging him for some kind of explanation. His response every time is always very cold and strange. Like, he is always nearly silent when she's talking and asking him these things. He would not tell her what she was lacking in their marriage or in her, or how long he felt this way. She never asked him to change his mind. She just wants him to walk her through his decision and show some concern for her and the kids, even if he was leaving. But he gives her nothing. It's like a wall got built between them. So she's like flailing and he just has no reaction. His only answers were, "I don't know. And once, you didn't do anything wrong. I begged him to do therapy with me on Zoom. He refused. And then he stopped answering my phone calls." He texted, "I'll answer what I want when I want. I'll speak when I want. I'll decide when I want." Yeah, we understand that you have basic agency, but there's also something called basic human decency. Again, they've been married for like 2 decades, and she had no inclination of him being unhappy in their marriage. So this feels like a total 180. While he refuses to talk to her on the phone, he ends up sending one clear message by text, which is that he plans to tell people that their separation was amicable and it was a joint decision. And he says it would be better for her well-being to say that she had wanted it too. I'm like, right, okay, because all the decisions we made so far have been for her well-being. This is when she finally puts her foot down and she refuses. She's like, "No, I'm not gonna say that." James had refused to tell his own family, his mother, brother, and sister. So when she ends up telling them, they are also shocked. Like, this is how out of the blue it came. So they are upset, they are worried. The brother and sister text Belle back and forth throughout the first few days, trying to figure out what had happened. Almost like this is like a puzzle that they can try to solve together. James's sister even looks up the LinkedIn photo of the woman that he was seeing, and she's outraged by the fact that like this woman's 35 but looks 20. The sister even tracks down the woman's parents, trying unsuccessfully to stop the affair. So, they're very worked up about it. And then suddenly, and ironically, on April 1st, 8 days after James walked out, his family suddenly cuts Belle off. In a joint text, his siblings said that in order to support James, they could no longer be in contact with Belle. And so the bluntness of the message and their coldness matching James's coldness absolutely stuns Belle. She had been a part of this family for 2 decades, and now she's also suddenly cut off, just like James did to her. And throughout the book, she does wonder, is there something that I did that made him feel this way that was so terrible that he had to walk out on me? And she admits some things like, she doesn't always share his interests in tennis or whatever. Maybe sometimes she can be a nag. All these little things that, can make sense for why the fire and passion in the marriage has died out, but not necessarily the coldness of which someone could walk away like that. She also tells her own family about what happened. They are also shocked. Her stepmother, that she's close to, emails James the second week since he's left and tells him that in her 45 years of practice as a family therapist, she's never seen someone leave a marriage so cruelly. And she begs him to speak to Belle and to do therapy with her and to try to at least end the marriage kindly and honorably. But this makes James furious, and he texts Belle that because of what the stepmom wrote to him, he's gonna continue the affair. I'm like, okay, right. That's the only reason you're continuing the affair. The stepmom just had to push you to that point with the email. I just think it's very telling how he tried to use this as a way to almost punish her for telling other people about the affair. You were clearly gonna cheat on her anyway, so why attribute some kind of arbitrary reason to it, So by late April, she decides that they can't keep the truth from the kids anymore. And she texts James that it's time to tell the kids and that they need to do it together. It can't be just her. By this time that she's texting him, they hadn't spoken in several weeks. And at the time, he even said that he thought it would be better if she told them alone. Because, of course he would. Initially, she had agreed with him because she was afraid that he would expose them to COVID since he wasn't in quarantine and he was having an affair in the middle of New York City. Still, she ends up thinking, it's important that he is there. So they decide that they would do a family Zoom call to break the news. Can you imagine finding out your parents are getting a divorce over Zoom? At this point, do you turn your camera cameras off or do you leave it on? Can you imagine having one of those animated backgrounds while it's happening and not knowing like how to turn it off? They end up not doing the Zoom call though, because James's boss, who's friends with both of them, texts Belle and says he understands why she's angry, but she needs to allow James to be there to tell the kids. And he speaks from experience. So he gives James his seaplane and pilot to fly to the vineyard. I'm like, what the fuck is the boss doing involving himself in this? And what do you mean you're giving your employee your own pilot to fly to his wife's vineyard to tell his kids that he's leaving? This really is some rich people bullshit right here. But anyway, when the boss tells her that, she's like ready to defend herself and point out the facts that he didn't even want to come and he didn't even want custody. But then she's like, okay, I need to be calm and accommodating because I'm gonna look like a bitter woman lashing out and potentially jeopardize James's job because apparently that matters for some reason. And so she ends up thanking the boss for giving James the plane. And so he arrives to the vineyard wearing a mask and he says that he has only 90 minutes until he has to return to the airport. So they gather in the living room. He's wearing his mask the whole time while pacing around the room. And he says, Mom and I are separated and we're going to divorce. I haven't been happy. And so keep in mind, he's continuing pacing around while speaking, not looking at either of the girls or at Belle, just wearing the mask the whole time. Like there's such like a coldness and weirdness to it. Belle is watching him and thinking that the way that he's moving and talking is so different to the point where she doesn't even recognize his body or voice. And she's wondering like, is he having a breakdown? Is he in love? Or is he just delighted to be free of us and he just genuinely doesn't give a shit? Okay, now I'm gonna read to you one of the first things in this book that made me gasp out loud. Are you ready for this? As soon as he said the word divorce, Carrie twisted her body to face the back of the couch. She was smiling. She thought he was joking. Then she looked at me, saw my grave expression, and shrieked. I tried to grab her, but she fled down the stairs, wailing in agony. Evie sat still and silent, with her arms crossed. James turned to me and said, I'm starving. Can you make me a sandwich? Hello? Now, you would think that the only appropriate response in this moment is to give him a fucking knuckle sandwich. But Belle is thinking, wouldn't a good mom make their child's father a sandwich? Shouldn't we be nice to each other in front of the kids? And so she goes and makes him a sandwich. Girl, stand the fuck up. If you don't use that butter knife to stab him right now. And so in the book, she goes into detail about making the sandwich. She toasts the slices of sourdough bread and they're rich. So you know that shit is artisanal too. She spreads the mustard. She layers the turkey. She slices the avocado and tomato. She sprinkles the sea salt. And honestly, it does sound pretty good, which is why I'm mad that she's making it for him. She even puts the sandwich on a white plate with a bamboo rim and slices it in half and adds a blue flowered print cotton napkin. I'm like, girl, what the fuck are you doing? Poison him. Maybe part of me thought that it would make him regret what he was doing. How could he leave a wife who made such good sandwiches? You know, one might wonder that perhaps he is leaving because he knows he can walk over you that easily. This is no shade and this is not victim blaming, okay? I just hate to see people get walked over like this. So she, is holding the plate of the sandwich, trying to find him around their big ass house, and she finds him in the basement looking for their prenup. This is his concern right now, not being with his children during his few remaining minutes at the house, not even like comforting them while, the daughters are clearly having a hard time, but his priority is finding the prenup. Still, it cannot be found. And so he ends up leaving for the airport. Don't worry, he got to eat the sandwich. He did it quickly as he stood by the front door. And then he was out. So that night, she eats dinner with the kids when her phone pings and it's a text from James. And the message says, "That was a great visit!" Exclamation point. She stares at the text and she's just stunned because Huh? Like, are we just living in two different realities right now? What's going on? I would love for people in the comments to write what you think is going on with this guy, because I'm just so baffled by the way that he handled this. And fortunately, she does not text him back, thank God. And then a few weeks later, he sends an email with no message, only an attachment. And it's a scan of the prenup, which his lawyer ended up finding in a storage facility. So yeah, that's basically how the book starts off. Can you understand now why I was clutching my pearls? And now I want to talk about the background story of how they got together. So they met when they were both working at a law firm, and they got engaged 3 months after their first kiss. There's like this irony of the speed of the beginning of their relationship and the ending of their relationship, because both of it came out of nowhere and there was no gray area. The switch went on and then the switch went off. He wanted it and then he didn't. A few months before the wedding, her mom reminds her that they need to sign a prenup. Belle's brother and his wife did have a prenup, and so the same lawyer gave them like the same kind of prenup template, and the draft of this prenup says that any asset that they brought individually to the marriage would remain theirs, but anything earned during the marriage and anything under a joint name would be split if they divorced. When she first told him about the prenup, James was upset about it. He says it made him feel like an outsider or like a threat, and so that would make her feel guilty asking him to sign it. And so the draft of that prenup would sit on her desk for a month unaddressed. And so then a few weeks before the wedding, she felt increasing pressure from the lawyer to get the document signed. James ends up asking her to make one amendment to the agreement, which is that instead of sharing anything earned during the marriage, only assets that had been put in joint name would be split. He explained that it was fair to do it this way. She calls the family lawyer on speakerphone. She doesn't tell him that James is listening. And the lawyer tells her it's a bad idea because it's standard to share in what was earned during a marriage, both by James and by her. It was what her brother and her brother's wife had done, and it's what most couples do, and that's the fair thing. And so she makes the counter argument, repeating the words that James had given to her to explain why they should make the change. And finally, the lawyer says, okay, Belle, if this is what you want. And so after they hang up, she remembers feeling like a wave of anxiety because she is going against legal advice. But at the same time, James is her family now. He's her soon-to-be husband, the future father of her children, the love of her life, and he's the man that she trusts the most. And their wedding's also like 3 weeks away. So any conflict over the prenup would like derail the whole thing. So she ends up not telling her mother or her stepmom or her brother about the amendment that they've made in the prenup because she worried that they would intervene and stop her. They get married and then they want to buy their own place in Manhattan. And for context, Belle's primary assets were held in 2 trusts. She basically asked to use that trust in its entirety to buy the apartment. And so when they closed the deal on the apartment, she listed her name and James's name as joint owners, even though he had not contributed to the purchase. This is foreboding, right? But at the time, she was happy to do it because she felt like this was her way of offering something to him, to their marriage, and to the family that they're going to create. And this is just something that she thought that you do when you get married. You share everything. And so then 5 years later, they become interested in buying a house on the vineyard. There's a listing that they like. James flies up to see the house. Belle can't go because their second kid is only 6 weeks old. So he checks out the house. He calls Belle an hour later, raving about it and talking about the future that they could have with the kids there. He's like, oh, I could see us doing like this and this. And she gets swept up in like this ideal future, and they decide to make an offer even though she has not seen the property. Their offer gets accepted and she wires the money for the down payment because this last trust matches the purchase price exactly minus a small mortgage. When they closed this deal, she did exactly what she had done with the apartment that they bought. She listed James and herself as joint owners. And at this point, they had been married for 5 years. She believed in the relationship even more strongly and in their commitment to each other. You can kind of see the sinking shit that's gonna happen from there, right? And obviously she does regret this a lot now. And so then they end up having kids. James was fully engaged with their first newborn, and then after the second kid, they debated on whether they should have a third. But after they had the second kid and that kid turned 2 years old, he calls Belle and he says, let's go for it. I'm a family man. I want another. After the second kid was born, James was promoted to president at the investment firm where he worked. And so as his work obligations became more intense, he slowly moved away from doing things with the kids. So he would often come home late. He would be exhausted. The only thing he would want to do is just eat dinner and go to bed. He would not like the mundane tasks of taking care of kids. And he would often say with some humor, I don't do bath, bed, or homework. And Belle never forced him to engage or help, so she would let him skip school nights, parent visiting days, most parent-teacher conferences. He went into the office every weekend, no matter what was going on with the kids. And in a way, this was like their unspoken bargain. He would work all the time, and she would take care of the kids all the time. She did like his commitment to his work. It was something that seemed honorable to her to put so much time in this and to be such a dutiful employee and to be working so hard for their family's long-term financial security. Every time he put on his suit or every time he went to work on a Saturday, it felt like he was taking care of them. And I think that this is something that many people in this kind of relationship dynamic often believe. Even as he receded from daily parenting, he was a kind of sweet father, and his role kind of became more of like a visiting celebrity. He would bring the kids to musicals. He took each kid on trips alone. So I think in a way, like, he was the fun dad. He wasn't doing the daily mundane things with them, but he was doing the fun shit with them that they can afford to do because they have money. On the other hand, Belle became a stay-at-home mom. What's interesting is that she did have help because she had hired someone as a babysitter when their first son was 2 months old. But even with that help, she never went back to paid work. In 2012, a former colleague offers her a job at a large foundation that he had been hired to run. But James was very clear with saying, you can't do that. You need to be here for the kids. And the speed of his response and the lack of discussion about it was just very startling. And so she thinks that he's right. She needs to be home. They have to prioritize his career. It was the way their family functioned. And so she turned down the job. But having a job is not the only thing that she has given up for James. She has also given up more finances. As James moved deeper into the investment world, she handed more of their financial life over to him because he was the one who understood the stock market, the balance sheets, the taxes. And this is something that, she doesn't want to deal with. It's complicated. I will admit it too. Every time I've tried talking to a financial advisor, I've had to remind them, I have no interest in learning this shit. I just want you to tell me exactly what to do, and I don't want to learn anything. So I understand it from her perspective, but their dynamic is that basically he would tell her how much money to wire into their checking account every month and the amount to pay in taxes. And he would deal with the gas company, the landscaper, the accountants, the bookkeeper, basically anything and everything to do with money. And he also would keep a really sharp eye on their spending. He would become agitated if their joint visa bill was too high or if a vacation was too expensive. And at hotels, he would make her smuggle food to him from the breakfast buffet so that they didn't have to pay one more cover. He would also ask her to annotate their joint credit card bills and explain each charge in tiny print. At the same time, he also had his own excessive moments too, especially when it was related to his passions. With his salary, he would buy the things that he loved and he would not hold back on it. He would buy dozens of rare Rolex watches, several motorcycles, custom suits, rare coins, a small vintage boat, expensive red wine. So it's interesting that he is so anxious and shrewd about certain things in their shared bills, but he goes all out with things that he is passionate about. So anyway, even with this dynamic, part of Belle did like it. She liked handing it over to him. She felt like his care for their money was his contribution to the family, and that was his way of showing his love and commitment to the kids. And there was something romantic about it too. I'm okay girl, whatever you gotta say. All the things I've been saying have been very foreboding, right, for what's to come. But it is talked about how throughout their marriage, it felt very solid. Whenever they heard about other people cheating or getting divorced, he would assure her that it would never happen to them. He said that they were different from other couples because they were so compatible, so similar. He told her every day that he loved her, and he would ask her often, "I make you so happy," right? He never told her, not even the once, that he was discontent in their marriage or unhappy with her or struggling in their life together. And so, obviously knowing what we know now, like, she is wondering, did she make up this love story? I do want to kind of point out like their family history because there is, a little bit of a pattern of this. So for some context, James's parents grew up with money in nice apartments in Manhattan. They attended private schools and impressive colleges. And then in the 70s, his dad had a breakdown and he was laid off and he just stopped working. And as the years went by, his parents had to spend their savings to cover basic living expenses and school tuition. When James was in law school, his parents divorced and sold their apartment for a fraction of its value. His father ended up moving to Connecticut and rented a one-room apartment in another family's house and just became a hermit and refused all luxuries, even a television. And so this is where I kind of feel like the concept of like father, like son plays into it, because his father did leave the family abruptly. He did abandon his life as a husband and father. Whenever Belle would ask about it, James would shut down and he would be unwilling to discuss it. And so her observation is that he seems to carry this story about his father and his family's financial ruin, very close and privately to his chest. It's a source of pain for him, but it's also something that is motivator at the same time, because that is what drives him to make money, is what drives him to support his parents, and it's also like a motivator to create his own family, one that he could make secure and rewrite the narrative. And he has told Belle how much he wants to be a husband and a father, and he told her how much he wanted an honorable life, which is why it's very ironic with the way that things turned out. As for Belle, her mom and father married in 1979 after 4 years of living together, and then they divorced 2 years after their marriage. They separated the month that the family moved into a new apartment, and they literally had only spent one night there before they divorced. The mom had left him for reasons that Belle now finds out is because of infidelity. Her mom has had a pattern of loving unfaithful men, including both of her husbands and her boyfriend of 3 decades. They were all unfaithful. And she broke up with that last boyfriend several times because of his infidelity for the final time, like back in 2018, which is like 2 years before Belle found out about James's infidelity. So there's really like a generational thing going on. Even going back to Belle's grandma, there are persistent rumors that her husband was a philanderer, and the grandma had grown to accept that he was unfaithful. So this is really just like a very common phenomenon among men, but I think also among rich and powerful men. Like it almost feels like this is just part of the package. She has grown up hearing her grandfather described as naughty and her mother's boyfriend being described as a flirt. And a lot of these times, these betrayals are kind of like chalked up to being described as like an unavoidable temptation. She has seen her mom and her grandma forgive these men, and they would quietly clean up the mess, and they would never really say a word about it. I think it was more important for them to keep things private and to not air out dirty laundry and to never call them out and to protect the man's belief in his own importance. And so ironically, like Belle thought she had ended this legacy and this pattern by marrying someone who was steady and unassuming and didn't really have a public presence and didn't flirt with other women, at least not in front of her and to her knowledge. Obviously, she has repeated this legacy, but unlike her grandmother's and mother's boyfriend, James seems to have no regret, and he did not want her back. That's like the difference between her and like the previous 2 matriarchs in the family. The only similarity is that he felt entitled to cheat, and he expected her to stay quiet about it. Belle talks about dealing with her social life post-divorce because, for context, they're part of like this country club or tennis club in the Hamptons. I don't know, some kind of rich people bullshit. So divorce rarely happens in this club, but they do kind of have like a rule when it does happen, which is that only one spouse can remain a member and the other has to reapply, starting the 3-year process from scratch. Apparently other members have been talking about it, discussing whether James or Belle would or should be the surviving member. And so Belle's like, I don't understand. He's the one in New York. He's having an affair. I'm here with the kids. Why wouldn't it be me? Something that she She believes, and honestly I agree with it too, if the situations were reversed, like if she had been the one to walk out on the family during a pandemic, if she was the one having an affair, there wouldn't really be a conversation about who would remain a member. At the same time, she's also juggling with like this other dynamic where she's learned not to say anything quickly too much and to like censor herself, because sometimes like when she would describe what's happening to her and add detail, she could feel the other person withdraw and like look down. And so it's like this fine line of like, if you say like a few too many sentences or too many details, you can step over this invisible line and you can become the stereotype of like this bitter, discarded wife who's ranting about her villainous husband. There's a lot of like propriety, that's going on. In September, she returns to New York. 2 weeks after her return, she receives an envelope in the mail. On the first page, there's a legal caption: she was being summoned to court, and James was asking the court to grant him a divorce and to enforce their prenup. Now, as we remember, the lawyer had found the prenup in the storage facility. This prenup would entitle James to an equal share of everything they had put in the joint name, including the house and the apartment. It would allow him to keep everything he earned during the marriage and kept in his own name, which is a number that she doesn't know yet. And this was a change that they had made to the prenup the days before they got married, like the change that James had requested, right? So now this is where we're seeing this shit is biting her in the ass. When he first left, as you can recall, when he was saying weird shit like, oh, you'll be fine, you're young, he also said, you can have the kids, you can have the apartment and the house. But now he is claiming his share of both properties. She calls James, and I'm gonna read to you the conversation that made me gasp out loud once again. "Why are you doing this to me?" He replied, "I'm not doing anything to you. You left us. You've never told me why." His voice was calm, cold. "I didn't leave you. I changed residences." I felt myself spin, losing control. "You did leave. You told me you were leaving me. You told me you were continuing your affair. You left me alone to take care of the girls, to deal with COVID by myself." I sobbed through my words as I did when he first left, when I begged for some explanation. He said in a sing-song voice like a taunting child, "Boo-hoo, poor Belle, always the victim." Honestly, I'm fucking gagged. Can you imagine your wife that you're leaving because you cheated on her is crying on the phone because you left her, and then you just filed like legal paperwork to claim the house that she bought with her trust fund, and you say, "Boo-hoo, always the victim." What the fuck? What is wrong with this guy? He had never spoken to me like this before. He had never mocked me. Then loud and pointed, "You were in a nice house on Martha's Vineyard. You had everything you needed. I paid my share of the bills. What was so hard about that?" He was right. I had everything I needed. I was more privileged than 99% of the world. The same set of facts that had been recast in his hands, molded again into a different narrative. In his version, I was lucky. In his version, he hadn't done anything wrong. In his version, he had never left. So this is where she's wondering, like, is he right? Like, did she just make it all up? Did she spin a story that was false that just made her the victim and him the villain? Like, there's a lot of like self-doubt that comes with this. And I'm like, I don't know, girl. Like, if this is factually what he said, if those were his real words and his real actions, I think that's fucked up and does make him a villain. Like, that's bananas to me. I don't know. And then some more BS happens. Basically in late October, she gets invited to a dinner party. She gets seated next to like this handsome, charismatic host who she did like, but she didn't really know that well. He was part of James's tennis group. "Boy, am I glad you're getting divorced. I'm finally beating James at tennis," he chuckled. "During our match last week, he took a call from you and came back so rattled he lost. So thank you." Then he said, "I gave James the name of my divorce lawyer. He represents all the Goldman Sachs guys. He's really tough. He's gonna keep you in court for years." So obviously this is fucking weird to say to this wife going through a divorce that you are helping facilitate by giving the guy your lawyer. And so she's wondering, like, is this guy trying to help me, telling me all this so like I can protect myself or be prepared? Or is this like a threat delivered on behalf of James? Is this basically like his way of saying like, oh, I should settle quickly or I'm gonna spend the next few years of my life getting crushed by what's about to come? Or is he just sharing facts that she should take in stride like a man? I don't know. These men are fucking weirdos, so who's to say? But you know what? It's not just the men either, because later she has a gynecologist appointment. She tells the doctor about James leaving, and so the doctor replies that she's sorry to hear that. She doesn't comment on Belle's weight loss, but this does happen. "She examined my breast and abdomen. I put my legs in the stirrups. She put on her gloves and said, 'You don't work, right?' She put one hand inside me, the other on my stomach, pressing. I said, "No, I'm a lawyer. I do pro bono cases, but nothing full-time, nothing paid." She said, "You know, women become less interesting to men when they don't work. It really has a negative impact on marriages. I've seen it a lot." Girl, maybe before victim blaming, try pulling your hand out of her cooch next time. And the gynecologist is not like the only person to imply this. She was the most explicit, but other people, usually working women, would kind of float this idea to Belle. And in a way, it's kind of like an easy answer to like make them feel better. To think like, oh, if you work, then this won't happen to you. Never mind the fact that James hadn't wanted her to work in the first place. In January of 2021, James and Belle have to exchange documents to go with like the legal proceedings. And so she sees in the documents year after year of his earnings, investment returns, and bonuses, all accumulating into a fortune that he held in his name alone. She knows that he's been doing well, but she didn't know the exact numbers. She did not know that he earned millions of dollars every year, whereas he knew everything about her, where every dollar of hers sat, but he hadn't hidden it either. Like, she just chose not to look and chose not to know. And now she's finding out the hard way. Because now James can claim ownership stake in both properties. He can walk away with his assets. He can become a partner at his hedge fund where his wealth will increase exponentially. To her, it feels like she's being left in the dust. So in February, her lawyer sends James a 50-50 custody agreement. She thought that they would reach resolution quickly, given that it was an equal split. Surely he would want to claim his time with the kids. He returns the documents, stripped of all his time, including vacations, holidays, weeks during the summer. He included only dinner on Thursday nights. His explanation is that he doesn't want to make the kids go back and forth between them, and he doesn't want to force them to rotate holidays. He says they're too old now, at 13, 16, and 18, to have to do any of this, and that they were fully formed human beings, and that they can decide when they wanted to see him. They can call him when they needed him. He seemed to believe that this was a selfless choice, and that he was making things easier. She tries to convince him of like everything that would be gained by living with the kids, the access that you get when you make them breakfast, when you help them with their homework, like just being there for them. But he's just absolutely resolute. He would not do it. While their divorce is pending, James and her continue sharing bills, expenses, taxes. He's still in charge. She still has to annotate credit card bills more precisely now, justifying every expense. He still approves any significant expenditures in advance. So then in July, the decision is delivered by email. The judge dismisses her counterclaim, enforced the prenup, and set a trial date in October. The trial would resolve child support and ownership of their joint property, including the house and the apartment. James is inflamed by the counterclaim that Belle had filed. He says that he would give her only the minimum child support required by law, and she would have to face the consequences of the prenup and of her failed counterclaim. In early August, James's lawyer sends a very searing letter where he restates the terms of the prenup. He assumes that she wants to buy James out of his interest in the house and the apartment, or she has the alternate options to sell one or both of her homes. And so this is where she realizes she can't afford to buy James out of either home. So she would have to sell both of her homes. This is where she is freaking the fuck out, because she's thinking, oh my God, my children are going to lose the house they loved, the center of our life as a family, the apartment where they lived, all of that while managing like the emotional toll of their father leaving. And to her, it feels like there's no reason for any of this, given that James is like already well off on his own, given his desire to like, you know, not be a part of like their lives at all, given his refusal to make a home for the kids. Like, why are we like doing this, you know? So to her, it feels like he's playing some kind of game or like running a deal against her, and that he's going to win at all costs, regardless of the impact of her and her children. So now she's like filled with shame. She can't get out of bed. Like, she doesn't make plans to hurt herself, but she keeps on like, you know, picturing putting a gun to her head or like hanging herself. Like, so she texts her mom about this. Within an hour, her psychiatrist calls her. Her doctor says this is suicidal ideation sparked by intense stress and anxiety. The doctor explains like, it makes sense why you feel this way, because there is a lot of emotional importance in a home. It's part of your history, your security, your identity. It's a way that like you nurture your kids. So obviously losing your home would be deeply dislocating to you and your children, as it is for many women going through divorce. What makes her doubtful about this is the fact that she is very rich and privileged. Like, she points out other women face so much worse consequences and maybe she shouldn't complain. But her doctor says this is still a profound loss, especially since the person that you trusted most is literally like on the opposing side. So the images that you're seeing in your mind of like putting a gun to your head, hanging yourself, whatever, this is like your own expression of agency with your brain giving you an escape hatch when you're faced with like something that makes you feel so helpless. So she puts Belle on an antidepressant. Unfortunately, that works out. Like the images stop in her head, but she still carries like a lot of fear and shame. So then as her lawyer and her prepare for trial, she tells people what's at stake and what James was threatening. There was a man who asked her how the divorce was going. She replies, not well. It's brutal. He's trying to force me to sell my homes, which I bought. To which the man smiled widely and said, he's playing hardball. And she's just like, is this a fucking game? To these people, like, now we get to the trial's conclusion. James and Belle reach a settlement an hour before their trial was set to begin, with terms that are determined by James. In their limited negotiations by email without their lawyers, he says if she pushes him, if she enlists the help of her lawyer, or if she refuses specific language, he will withdraw his offer and go to trial. So in the end, the conclusion is that he gave up his interest in the house, the apartment, the beach, and the club. So she can keep that. Great. He pays her child support. He covers medical expenses and high school tuition for the kids. He keeps the money he accumulated during their marriage. That's basically the conclusion. She doesn't know what finally made him decide to settle. Maybe he like generally never gave a shit about the house and apartment and he just wanted to like play hardball with her, I guess. And so that's basically like the messy legal drama that happened from there. As for her life like outside of that, she doesn't date other people. There were, loved ones that would encourage her to date, but she would often think like, why do I have to secure a man to be okay? She wanted to reject like this idea that this should be her happy ending or her definition of moving on or success. So she ends up not dating at all. And I'm like, you know what? Good for her. Something that she does do instead is start writing. So for context, she used to love to write, but her ex-boyfriend back when she was like in her early 20s told her that she couldn't be a writer. And so ever since then, she never really like tried again. But now she's picking it back up again. And she writes about the story of James leaving and like the emotional layers and like, the aspects of their parting that a legal document could not tell. And to her, it wasn't just journaling or venting. She really liked being deliberate in like the art and craft of it, which I think, for writers in general, there is part of that enjoyment, right? With like, how do you craft together a story? How do you convey like certain emotions and feelings and themes? So within a couple of weeks, she has a rough draft. At almost the exact moment she finishes it, a friend emails her the link to a memoir writing class. And she's like, oh my God, like this is a sign. I need to do this. So she takes the memoir writing class and she takes it a second time again in the spring of 2022 after the divorce is finally settled. So basically, I think like the timeline is she started it while they were dealing with the messiness divorce. She takes the second class again after the divorce is settled. She would write about her father's death, her stepfather's death, just like about, her life in general. Then the day after the memoir class ended, she submits the piece that she wrote about James to the New York Times to see if like, maybe they'll pick it up. 9 months later, the editor at the New York Times says they are considering her piece for publication. She works on the essay with the editor and they're close to finalizing the draft. And he tells her that she needs to show the essay to James to get his reaction. In order for them to move forward, James has to approve the piece as a whole. He has his right to reject to being written about at all, especially like on a global platform. And so if he does, the New York Times would drop the piece because they're not going to risk a lawsuit, especially if the subject is a wealthy man and a former lawyer. So she tells the editor that they're at an impasse because she could not elicit James's reaction. And so that's basically where she reached the end of the road. But then in June 2023, her desire to publish her story did not go away, especially because she liked the essay. Like she worked on it for more than a year. She worked on it with the editor. She wanted it to be read. So she finally sucks it up and she emails James and she says, I've started writing again and it has been helpful to me. I wrote a piece about our divorce, which I would like to publish. Do you want to read it? He says yes. She sends it. He doesn't answer for 10 days. She writes him again. And he finally answers, I haven't been able to bring myself to read it. Are you critical of me? And then before she can respond, he texts, your article is good, sad, hard to read. I'm supportive. And this absolutely surprises her. And honestly, it does for me too. She doesn't know why he approved it. I don't know either. Maybe he didn't see anything wrong with the story. Maybe he thinks like he was allowed to leave the way that he did, or maybe he wanted to help her. I don't know. But regardless, they published the piece. After the essay is published, she gets emails and texts from friends and loved ones congratulating her. Then over the next few days, she receives more than hundreds of texts and emails. Some sent to her directly or some forwarded it to her, like by the publisher. Both men and women would thank her for writing the essay. Many would write that the same thing had happened to them. One woman wrote, "Miss Burden's essay made me feel less alone, so she has in fact made a difference in my life." But of course, when anything is put out in the public, it's never all positive. One woman wrote, "This seemed like more of a roast and outing of her former spouse. Honestly, just mean." Another woman, a lawyer, addressed the impacts on my children. "Belle, there is no excuse for you to involve your children publicly in the failure of your marriage." One reader wrote, "I have to say the story is so polished, it's totally unbelievable." The article was reposted on online blogs, which also, opens up a forum for more bashing of her. And they don't hold back because it's the internet, right? So she gets called a rich bitch who deserved to be left. She gets called ugly, fat. There's sentiments of like, James is the hero, the man leaving an unhappy marriage to an awful person. 2 days after her piece appeared online, the Daily Mail posted an article about her. And within a few hours, it rose to the top of their website. And the way that it was written made her story and decision to publish seem like it was vindictive and sad. And also her friends tell her that many people at the club that they're in are gossiping about her. They don't understand why she did that. They're shocked that she would do that. To be fair, the editor had told her that they never publish pieces that ring of bitterness or vengeance. Like, he said that he had picked hers because it wasn't that. And she had worked hard throughout the editing process to remove any anger from the story and to keep her tone even and fair. But still, she would ask herself, am I doing this to hurt James? She wants James to understand what had happened after he left and to see the impact and to see her. But isn't that different from revenge? Or is it the same thing? Is there overlap? Here's my hot take. I don't care if she even did it for revenge, honestly. After all the wild shit that we've heard that he did, I'd be like, you know what? Write whatever the fuck you want, girl. But I can understand how, it's frustrating how even when you try really hard to tone down your voice and to make sure you don't seem so like angry or bitter or jealous or whatever, people will still always have like that assumption. But again, my hot take, even if she was just fucking bitter and angry and she only wrote that piece out of malice, I don't really care. Because I'm like, yeah, that is fucked up. I would understand why you're upset about this. So a week later, after the essay comes out, during cocktails before a dinner party, a friend pulls Belle to the corner of the room and she tells Belle what another woman at the club has been saying. Basically, she's talking about Belle as a mother, saying that a good mother wouldn't do this. They wouldn't do it to their children like this. And basically, as the summer progressed, Belle would continue to absorb people's reactions, and she was her own harshest critic, thinking she has embarrassed herself, she's a selfish, vengeful person, she's a bad mom. But then she also has to lock in and think the other way around, where, as I mentioned earlier, there is such a phenomenon of women having to put up with infidelity and having to always be graceful about it. And so she believes that writing this essay is proof that women do deserve to have a voice. And why is it that so much of the sentiment seems to be that a woman writing a man leaving is worse than a man leaving? And so how the book concludes is her wrapping together like this generational pattern of infidelity and staying silent and thinking about it in the context of like her daughters moving forward and wondering if like maybe telling the story publicly and saying what happened to them and pointing out that this is wrong, or at least sharing like what she went through and all the feelings that she went through, is a way that could help her kids. Maybe if her kids saw that her mother is rising to the occasion and seeing her claim her life and give clarity to their experience instead of like sweeping it under the rug, maybe that is more beneficial than what the women in this family have been doing like for generations. So that's like the sentiment in the closing chapter of the book. In the end, she never got the answers that she wanted from James. She knows that James has not remarried. She knows that he's still a partner at the hedge fund in Olita. She doesn't know if he's still with that other woman or who he's dating now. He didn't really give a clear answer for like his leaving in the first place, but it gets to a point where it's like, you can't wait around for that answer. You just gotta move on with your life. He does see the kids for occasional dinners, tennis matches, and Rangers games. He's always kind and loving to them while sticking to his initial decision about co-parenting, which is that there are no overnights, vacations, or holidays since the day he left. Her hope is that since she has been open to what had happened to her, then her children will insist on knowing their partner more deeply and talking to their partners about money and about what will happen if the partnership ends. But most importantly, she hopes that they know from watching her and seeing how everything falls apart that they can still get up and piece together something new. So yeah, we have ended it on a hopeful note. And now let's get into the controversy around this book. This really sprung up upon the New Yorker investigation about this book. I'll link it in the description as well for people who are interested in reading. But it's this article that's called "What's Missing from Belle Burdened Strangers." So the New Yorker reports that there are some discrepancies between this account. Specifically, Belle had described this as a trial, but it was actually a status conference, which is a much lower stakes proceeding in the whole legal process. There wasn't any actual trial date that had been set. I don't know why she described it as a trial if it was technically not. Maybe it seemed more dramatic in her head, or maybe because trial is easier to understand than whatever a status conference is. But, you know, obviously in a memoir, you should be as close to factual as possible. But the bigger revelation is that upon looking into how much money she was making, Belle had reported an $800,000 income the year before her divorce, and her assets were $10 million, over which her husband had no claim. So she has significant financial resources on her own from like her income, investments, interests. Before she married, her financial assets and trust interests were valued at roughly $63 million, although a large portion of that money was not immediately accessible. By 2020, which is the year that he had walked away on the family, she had more than $10 million in investments and a family partnership stake that remained hers after the divorce. So with those specific numbers, there's a specific paragraph in the book that is just not as dramatic as she's making it sound, to the point where it's arguably not even factual. It says, "My children were going to lose the house they loved, the center of our life as a family, and the apartment where they lived, in addition to managing the emotional toll of their father leaving. I was going to lose what my grandparents and my father had given me, betraying them too. I was going to lose my financial security." That last sentence here is simply not true. I think maybe emotionally it feels like you're losing your security because all the other previous sentences are true. So it does feel like this book painted the scenario as if there were higher stakes involved, when she would have been fine either way. Also, the eventual settlement was still pretty good. In the end, she gets to keep both homes. She receives $3 million from one of James's investments. She gets to retain other valuable property. And though she says that his support is limited to just child support, the child support that he gives is $50,000 a month, plus many of the children's major expenses. So the article is saying that because her memoir leaves out those facts about how much money she actually did have, then it undercuts the idea of financial vulnerability that she had during her divorce, because her security financially was never in any danger. I can understand her not wanting to literally write out how much money she was making, because that's automatically not going to give people any sympathy for you, and it's going to remove the emotional weight that you're describing of this situation where your husband is leveraging these homes against you. But again, I feel like she should have stated the facts, but then gone more into like the emotional part of it. Because I do believe the emotions. I do believe in how much of a betrayal and a violation it is. Because ultimately, to her, it probably wasn't even about the money. It was about the principle. Like, regardless of how much money you have, it isn't right for your husband to be cheating on you and trying to get half of everything that you brought into the marriage, while he gets to keep everything he earned during the marriage because he got to work and discouraged you from working. And I totally understand people giving her the side eye for that. I think that this is something that she could have easily just stated, just for the sake of covering her ass, so that there wouldn't be like articles and skepticism about this. Because once you talk about money, people really are going to be looking into your money. And I feel like that transparency would have been important even if it undercut like the drama of the book. I am kind of glad that she is filthy rich and has so much privilege, because then I don't have to worry that something really bad is gonna happen to her. This is just like rich lady problems that I can be like, damn, that's fucked up. But I don't have to feel like, oh my God, some woman is gonna be like driven out on the streets. So I would love to hear in the comments what you think, given this knowledge and what this article points out. Does this new additional context change things for you regarding like the book and how she went about it? Does learning about someone's income determine whether someone is deserving of sympathy or not, or whether it's okay for their husband to take whatever he can? And I'm sure this video is very long, so I'm gonna end it here. I would love to know what you thought about this book, what you think about this new context that the New Yorker article has revealed. I will see you next time. Goodbye.